Hello viewers and welcome to the first team chat of 2019. Lots of games on the way this year, and of course we're kicking off today discussing the Grand Tour game which was released last week. Of course I'm joined by Kevin.
Hello.
And we'll be discussing what I suppose our experience of the Grand Tour game today. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk a bit about the run-up to the game, which has been kind of shrouded in secrecy over the past few months. So we had a gameplay trailer last year, but it's been very strange. Normally when you show a new game, you have multiple trailers, you have developer interviews, preview events, and it leads up to launch, so that consumers know what they're going to be buying and have a rough idea, having looked at all the different content. But on this particular title, there's been nothing. There's been nobody for the media to talk to. There's been no option to try the game and see how it's developing. And the trailer itself, the frame rate I noticed in the trailer at the time wasn't necessarily great. It didn't show off the game to its best potential for sure. And so it's a game that's sort of had a muted release, and also a note on the price, which has had a few changes. Kevin, what was the original price?
So the original price was like $24.99, and then it dropped to was it $11.99? So it was less than half price, just like a few days out from launch. So it was very bizarre
And disjointed. It seems like the whole launch campaign has been very disjointed. And yet there's clearly, a lot of investment that goes into making a game like this. So Grand Tour then, it's been a funny one coming up. I mean, obviously we've seen various videos of people wondering where it is and what's happening. And there was no sort of major launch event, anything like that. It's almost like they had an idea, thought they would go with it, didn't know what to do with it, decided to launch it anyway. Rather than just can it, and that's kind of the feeling I got from it. And it turned out that $11.99 is probably what it should have been discussed about in the first place.
Probably.
But let's talk about the game, Kevin. You've played it more than me.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about your thoughts on the Grand Tour.
So yeah, I mean, like you say, the fact that we haven't seen very much of it, obviously, it sort of leads to doubts in the quality of the final product. So I wasn't expecting a massively fantastic game, shall we say, especially in light of the price drop as well. So my expectations were pretty low, and in spite of that, I still think it's probably it was still underwhelming, even though I was expecting I was setting the bar pretty low. So it just seems like they sort of rushed it out the door for the season 3, which kicked off on Amazon Prime just recently, a few days back. Just seems like the game was released just to sort of make that deadline. It has a number of issues which we'll discuss shortly. But even though I set the bar very low, it was still underwhelming for me.
Yeah, I mean, so from my perspective, I'm always about, obviously we like to run the preview content, the news. It's about getting some views, some coverage, and getting some exposure for it. And we received the game the day of launch, which in many respects gives you no time to play it, to edit content, put it together. It takes time, all of this. So it's sort of in the public domain before you've even had a chance to really have a look at it and analyze it in any detail. I suppose I'm just going to get on to first impressions of it.
Yep.
First race, I was all over the road. It was. I remember going into a corner and hitting the brakes, thinking, "Oh, that's a corner," and smacking into a barrier basically because you didn't need to hit the brakes at all at any time. And there lies the first problem: the handling. I just thought, "What is going on?" It's a very pointy car, pointing around here, pointing around there. The only time it felt comfortable was when it was going near enough flat out. And if you do go to a corner and you just want to lift and coast a bit, it handles it. The gearbox isn't necessarily massively helpful or responsive. And another thing I noticed in that first race was the sound seemed a bit quiet. The voice samples seemed to be done in a cheap way. They were very quiet. Nothing really felt very well integrated in the audio side of things. And it all felt very bland, almost like a kind of mobile game that was made for consoles in a way. So I went through this first race and I thought, okay, let's see where it goes. And you have various driving elements that tie in with the episode, and it's nicely done. I think the integration between program to game. I like the way you can skip the show, and Jeremy saying like "get out of my way" or something. I like things like that where you can sort of skip the show, get to the gameplay elements, which is handy. But and I think then the transition is really nicely done. And what the transition highlights is how much detail there is in some of the graphics, and the cars themselves look good. The environments have got some nice spot effects and details. The tarmac in Algarve, for example, is nicely detailed with lots of tire marks and elements there. So there's lots of graphical work that's gone into it, but the sound for me isn't quite where it should be, and the obviously the handling is a mess. It doesn't know what it wants to be, really. It's almost like we want a game that somebody, it's almost like you could see that the marketing team sat down and said, we want a game that beginners can play, people watch the Grand Tour who've never played a racing game can play, and they can race round and they can win. And yet the difficulty changes quite radically. I mean, there's a sports car race around the Algarve as well, and it's quite a radical increase in difficulty when you get to a race like that compared to some of the others. Like they wanted the odd challenge in there for gamers who had a bit more skill, maybe. But it's a very curious game, and there's almost zero longevity to it in terms of the modes. As I say, these are sort of side modes on a major campaign that they've just sort of cut in there.
Yeah,
it seems like a lot of effort and work to make one bit of straight or squiggly road just to race down for one minute race with Richard Hammond or something. So it's I'd say my first impressions were quite curious. I remember looking for a view button. There was no view change button. I wanted to be in the car. I can see that it's designed from outside the car. Sometimes it kind of reminds me of a sort of Burnout 3 style. It's a strange style to it in terms of the handling, look and feel, and it's almost like all the work went into the transitions and then not much in between to that extent. But I do like some of the quirkiness, like you've got Jeremy likes a power slide, and James May has his fizz, likes a bit of fizz or something, fizz from the car. And I do like some of the elements. You've got to scare Richard or something. I like that. I just think if that audio had been better integrated, there's some really nice ideas in there. It just feels like it was a bit rushed. It was a bit, I don't know how involved the guys were in terms of the game development, but I felt that it feels to me like the game development was very separate. And if anything, they've had to use sound bites from the show rather than getting them in the studio to record voiceover elements.
Absolutely.
And that's why you've ended up with this strange sound balance where it's almost like you're driving along sound bite, rather than something a bit more natural and putting it all together. It's almost like an experiment for an interactive TV show rather than anything else. But Kevin, you've played more of it. What kind of challenges stood out in terms of how it developed?
It's all pretty samey. You have traditionally you have like a to B point race, or you do like a lap here and there on a certain track, but it's all very similar. I've played through season 1 and 2 content. I've played a bit of season 3 as well, and I must say straight away when I got onto the game, the menus, it's like we've gone back in like by 10-15 years. They were so dated, and you almost feel like, is that on purpose or not? Are we in on a joke there, or is it you're not quite sure where to place this game? And like you say, the audio mix is terrible. Even like the show sequences before you get onto the gameplay pieces seems very low in audio. And like you say, with the voice samples, again, they're very low. I had to put my headphones on just to sort of hear those, because they just seem to be very poorly balanced in terms of all the different audio channels, and even the car audio and the music, it all seems like it's completely imbalanced. So they lost a lot of its charm with that. Like you say, with the voice samples, they're sampled from the show as far as we can tell, because there's nothing there that I've heard that's fresh or new. So I believe it's all from the shows, and it was an element that could have worked so well, and yet they've messed it up basically, and they've just sort of put it in, like you say, very cheaply. It's like it's almost as if it was like one guy in charge of the whole audio package. It was very sort of rushed together. So that was a major disappointment to see that, because it had great potential. In terms of car handling, I mean, for me, all the cars understeered to the point where you're hitting the barriers all the time. You have to come off the accelerator, which you shouldn't really have to do with an arcade racer. You should really be able to give it the beans. Of course, you press the drift button and you get this massive sort of snap oversteer, which is, in my opinion, too much the other way. So you have this either sort of understeering car or this massively oversteering drifty car. There needs to be sort of a balance in between. I didn't find that suited my style, at least anyway, and just felt they got the balance wrong. Like you say, the one view, the chase cam, it's not ideal, is it? I mean, how many racing games have you played where it's just one viewpoint? It's a very odd decision, and a bumper cam I felt would have done a lot better for a game like that. More sort of sense of speed, because as long as it's not too low to the ground, I guess it could be a nice playable view. But then again, the sequences are so short that by the time you've changed a few of the viewpoints, you're probably going to hit the finish line pretty soon after. So graphically, it's a bit of a mixed bag, I would say. The environmental textures are a little bit poor, but some of the cars do look pretty decent, and the lighting on some of the cars as well is very well done. And like you say, the transitions, again, some are very good, some are exceptional, some are very poor actually. So it's like a mixed bag, but overall the experiences are pretty similar. I managed to actually get the gold medal in all of the season 2 events on the first go, which was strange because season 1 for me was a little bit tougher. But it's more or less the same. If you played through season 1, you know what to expect pretty much with 2. So it doesn't really change drastically in terms of sort of gameplay events. So it's very limited in that respect. And like you say, it just feels like almost like an experiment to see if it would work. And for me, it doesn't work at all.
No, it's I mean, we've broken it down in a few areas there, haven't we? So we've talked about audio and how the audio bounces off, the samples aren't great, and it does seem like the guys weren't involved in the audio. Graphically, it's a mixed bag, as we say: cars, lighting, some textures, some particle effects, some really nice effects in there. Some of it's really bland, tracks are really wide, and then you go onto the gameplay and the handling. Let's talk about handling. It's just all over the place. I mean. I remember it says, you've got to do a clean lap or something with I don't know, James May or Richard Hammond. That's it, Richard Hammond. You've got to not scare him or something. And the handling's really strange. I remember braking and going quite slowly at one point, and the game kind of lost control and just sent me off the track. And I don't even know what happened. It was really weird. Sometimes the control would behave, be completely unresponsive, and it would just send me off the track into a wall, and I didn't know what was happening, so I just had to restart the game. And I found that unless you were going fast, the cars were largely uncontrollable. And it's weird because it's like you were talking about menus, and it just ties into this. It feels like a game that was made, on a PS2 era, on the PS1, PS2, Dreamcast, not a modern day. Now, when I played it, I didn't have an online integration because literally when I put it on to play it, I suddenly got a 4 gig update, and I was like, well, I've got to play the game now. So I played it offline. I don't know if there's online elements that are going to set the world alight, but when you look at a racing game like this and you think, we want to make a game about the Grand Tour, what's it going to be? I think you've got to think about what the gameplay is going to be first. What are people going to do? What's going to keep them coming back? Where are people going to be able to improve themselves? And I think what they've done is very much throw away, you'll only ever play this once and you'll never play it again game. And that's what they've created here. As I say, I think it's funny the way they've integrated things. I think the person who integrated the sound in terms of the idea of it's done a great job. But in terms of the handling and the gameplay, I mean, that Algarve should be a circuit that you want to do laps on, that's really comfortable and fun to play, where you're power sliding through corners and feeling like you want to nibble apexes and get better and better, I didn't feel that, because all I was doing was going flat into corners. I mean, there are corners that, you would normally brake in, go down to second gear. Here you were just going in full speed and lifting, or you might bump off the wall. You can wall bounce on it quite comfortably, so that you don't really lose any speed and just bounce into corners. So I just found it was easier to drive at full speed than it was, as I say, going slowly, where once you go below a certain point in speed, the car goes all over the place, because it didn't have a proper speed sensitive steering. So no, I mean, handling wise, a mess. Obviously doesn't use a wheel. I think because of the handling type, if it had a bumper cam, you'd have had a pointy vision. Your view would have been bouncing from side to side, and I think they realised that just isn't going to work because of the way they've given it. So you can be a bit more detached and have a more controlled rear view camera. So far, I've not seen. I think more modes would have been good. Like they had, like perhaps Grand Tour football. Like they had in Forza Motorsport in the past, or even a Rocket League style mode, or some kind of like tank mode or something where they just blow each other up or something.
There's nothing original, is there? That's the problem.
Yeah, there's so much you can do with this action game, and I think that, but it all starts with handling. It all starts with needing a bit of skill, and I appreciate I don't think James May is a gamer. I think Richard Hammond might play him now and again, not often, but Jeremy seems to be the gamer there. He in the past, many years ago, was a big fan of Gran Turismo, and you would think that he would appreciate the fact that you need a little bit of learn how to drive the car a bit, but if you just make it so that 4-year-olds can play, then that's all you're ever going to get. There's nothing else to do, and it's a real shame because, like you said about the graphics, there was McLaren P1 there. I thought that was really nice body work, nice reflection effects, but wasted on simply making a great cutscene, transitioning to the TV show. That was the best part of the whole session. Nice depth of field effect then, and then boom, you get into the game. Also, the director gives you some direction before what we're doing in this event, or the producers, and I just found, wouldn't that be better to have had a person on screen? Even done that, even with a cutscene.
Yeah.
I think that would have been better, because often you're looking at your car, you're not reading the text immediately above your car. You've got about 2 seconds to read whatever's there and fully understand it, which often I didn't, because by the time I saw it pop up, I looked up and it was gone again. And so then I'd have to do the activity, sometimes not knowing what I was actually supposed to be doing at all, and then restarting, having got my head around it. So, yeah, it was a bit of a strange one there. So, I guess I haven't tried. Obviously, we've got season 2, season 3. I guess now wrap up our thoughts, really, because there's almost not much to say on it. It's so lightweight. What are you feeling so far on it, Kevin?
Yeah, I just feel like it was such a budget game that not much game there. I'd like to sort of go to these tracks in a separate mode where I can race around at my leisure, but it seems like we're just tied down to the sort of show elements and the gameplay after. So you're very much on rails throughout the whole experience. So it'd be nice just to get to one side and say, right, I want to get onto this track using this car. I don't believe there's any choice to do that, so it's very odd. A wasted opportunity. It had an interesting element about it. It was unique in the way it was packaged together, but ultimately it comes across as a very, very shallow experience. It's very underwhelming. Even big fans of the show, I don't know, they're going to be disappointed, I think, with a game like this. It's quite possibly the worst game I've played in a long, long time. So yeah, I certainly can't recommend it in its current state. It'd be interesting to see what they do in the future, if they bring out a sequel maybe down the line, if they can expand upon the ideas, but at the moment it's very shoddily put together, I'd say, and it just sort of, it's as if it needs a lot more budget behind it, a lot more development time. But yeah, it's a long way from where it should be, I feel, with a game with a brand like the Grand Tour.
Yeah, I think the Grand Tour is, they are a big brand. We don't know how long they've had to develop this. We don't know if they actually got to develop exactly what they wanted from it, or whether they've just had to, rush something out the door. But either way, I think they've ended up with, like you say, a very shallow experience that shows some potential but doesn't realise its potential, and isn't a complete gaming product by any stretch. It's a shame, because the cost of development surprisingly high for all these elements that you see here, and so I always wonder. Now you've built all these assets, these cars and tracks. Don't you want to turn them into something more complete? And maybe they will go with something in the future. We don't know what the future is going to be of the Grand Tour TV show. Is this the last series? There's rumours that it is. In which case, this will be no more. Or perhaps if there's another series of the Grand Tour, perhaps we'll see it develop somewhere. But either way, I think, I'd say potential, but ultimately very disappointing product. And not doesn't do for the Grand Tour what it could and should have, but it does show how where we had Black Mirror Bandersnatch released on Netflix at Christmas, we've now got an interactive video game like this, and it might be games like this that end up being streaming games in the future, where you're watching a TV show and you can choose to interact with that show in some way, and that might add something. But I think that's it for now, Kevin. I think we've just about covered it. Any final words?
Ambitious but rubbish.
Ambitious but rubbish. And on that bombshell, that's our look at the Grand Tour game. Certainly a bit rubbish, and it could have been better. But either way, that's it from me and Kevin for now. Do like and subscribe. Do follow us for our regular streams on various games as well, both on the Team VVV and Team VVV Games YouTube channels. Those links will be in the description. You can follow us for our racing gaming on the racing channel, as well as some general gaming and general gaming chat to come as well. But that's it from me for now. As ever, more soon.